Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag gear review video. It is a little chilly here, so I have opted to wear a hat, but I want it to look nice, so collared shirt. In this episode, we are going to talk about Clarks, specifically their Desert London shoe or their desert shoe, which is a variation on the desert boot, which Clarks is very famous for. To give you a little background, Clarks is a England-based shoe manufacturer and seller, and they're very, very famous for that desert boot I just mentioned. If you spend any time at all on like male fashion advice on Reddit, if you follow any sort of male fashion hashtags on Instagram, Clarks pops up a lot, specifically because they make a nubuck or suede boot stitched to a sole, and the sole's made of crepe. They have a number of other varieties, such as a wallaby, such as this, which is just a shoe variation of that desert boot, a chukka, and they're all the similar sort of creation. They're all sewn to the sole. They all have a crepe rubber sole, a natural crepe rubber sole, and they're unlined pretty much on the inside. It's nothing but well, this leather lined, I guess, actually, now that I'm looking at it. But they're very basic. They're very, very simple. And I think they run about $100, $120. The reason I wanted to talk about these, although I mentioned the fashion advice rather than like one bag or something like that, is because I personally have found a really good spot for them in my bag. I wanted years and years and years ago, 2012 is when I bought these, and now we're in 2022, yeah? Got to check the date on that one. So for 10 years, and you can kind of tell there's definitely some wear and tear here, where the foot bends naturally. It's starting to sort of, it's definitely starting to split the leather a little bit. There's a hole forming here. Definitely some wear and tear, but for 10-year-old shoes, they've been oiled and taken care of every winter. They've done really well. And in fact, most of this, the tearing on the leather only happened a couple years ago when it snowed, and unfortunately I happened to be wearing these, and I didn't realize. I lived in Savannah, Georgia at the time, which is not famous for its snow. Nobody really knew it was coming, and I was sort of, basically the next morning I realized that the water had just gotten in there, froze, tore the leather. It was my fault. I should have kept them out better, because the other shoe of the two doesn't have nearly that same amount of wear and tear. So it's unfortunate that just the one did get a little damaged. But the reason I wanted to talk about these is because I am often on the lookout for a casual shoe, or a boot. I prefer a shoe to a boot because you can wear the shoe in more than one or two seasons, but something you can wear to almost anything. If you're walking around a town, if you're going to an event, if you're trying to look nice, if you want to look presentable, or if you're just looking for something that can take a bit of a beating and then be cleaned off and ready to use again, I have found these fit that perfectly, and I was really excited to find that, because I bought them thinking it was sort of when I was 18, and it was my first foray into trying to look better when I dressed, basically. It's like I stopped wearing t-shirts. I've since started wearing t-shirts again. But I was like, I'm only going to wear leather shoes, and, I'm only going to wear jackets. And I was 18. Please give me some, cut me some slack. So I ended up buying these because I wanted something that wasn't a dress shoe, but still looked really nice. So that's my background. To talk about the shoes specifically, I first wanted to talk about the sole. You can tell these are completely flat. That is not how they come. There is a little wedge on the back that is basically twice the thickness of this, so it gives you a little lift in the back, like a dress shoe would. I actually sawed it off, and you can kind of tell from the I keep squinting, by the way. I don't have my glasses on, which is why I squint. If it looks like I'm squinting and you can't figure out why, it's because I'm not wearing my glasses. But I cut the the bottom heel off simply because I didn't like that lift. I had gotten used to walking around in Lems, in the Tevas, in shoes and sandals that had no difference between the toe and the heel. I talked about like zero drop a lot in the Lems video, and I wanted to make something similar with these. I wanted to make a zero drop shoe because they don't make zero drop dress shoes. So I thought, they made it easy enough to cut it off. However, when you buy it new, this will be slightly thicker here than the rest of it. And then it's a crepe sole. There's a little bit of texture you can kind of see here from this that just hasn't been worn away. And it has a pretty decent grip. It's not amazing. As you can tell, it's a very smooth sole. But what I like about it is that it's very resistant. Sharp objects, resistant in the sense that it almost is like self-healing. I don't know if you've ever used like self-healing cutting mats. A lot of crafters or people who cut paper on a mat will use these rubber self-healing cutting mats that when they just kind of go back together after they've been cut. I found these shoes to be a lot like that because I've damaged the soles quite a bit. Just sharp rocks, like I just mentioned, slipping on things, getting them cut with things, any variety of just in the last 10 years doing things that punctured the sole. But I found out that, after a month or so, that puncture would disappear, that cut would close up. So I found them resistant in that aspect, but as well as walking, all of my other soles, it's like they're very hard soles, so they get slowly worn away, smoothed down. But with these, because I think they're so spongy, they don't get worn down and smoothed away as much. Instead, they stay pretty springy. And for a 10-year-old pair of shoes to still have sole, I was very surprised. And it's only in the last 6 months, unfortunately, that on this beat up shoe, there has been a tiny little hole at the bottom. You can see my finger coming through. And that is basically the ball of my big foot has just finally worn away. However, I mentioned earlier, they are sewn on, which is one of the other aspects of the Clarks that I really like, is that the sole and the leather upper are sewn together, so you can take the stitches out, have them resoled, stitched back together, no problem. And like all dress shoes, they run a little large. So for me, I think these are like 10 or 10 and a halves. Okay, they're 10 and a halves. My normal shoe size is 11 and a half, so I went down a whole shoe size buying these, and they still have a little bit of space inside. I could have probably gone to a size 10 and would have been fine. But that's, for me, it's really nice because I know that when they resole it, you can't use the same holes again. You have to come in a little bit, and it makes the shoe ever so slightly smaller. So I'm happy to know that there is a little space, at least in that first resoling, that will provide a little bit more life to it. And then, of course, there's the upper, the leather kind of nubuck, I think it's what it's called, upper. Very simple, very straightforward. I believe it's beeswax finished when you first get them new out of the box. And since then, once a year, I do try to use beeswax on them. I mentioned in the Lems video that I used beeswax on them as well. It's something I've just been trying out to see how well it works. And you can tell the sides of the shoe have remained fairly intact. There's no real wear and tear, even on, that was the beat up one. And of course, in the non-beat up one, it doesn't look old. It doesn't look necessarily worn away. It doesn't look too aged. When I clean them up and buff them a little bit, which I obviously did not do for this video, they look even nicer. But it's not an insulated shoe at all, right? Like I mentioned in the different video, the Lems, that's an insulated boot. This is a very uninsulated, so in the winter, they are quite chilly if you're not wearing socks. But that also means in the summer, they're not that bad. I have no problem wearing them year round. Very thin leather, but not that thin, I guess. It's just the thickness of the tongue, which is not so thin that you might actually get a wear through it, but it's thin enough that it doesn't feel too hot. And then lastly, of course, I did replace the laces with my own because I didn't like the ones they came with. I wanted something that was a little bit more robust and colorful. It's a very simple shoe. I actually just looked online to see if you could find it. It looks like they're not selling them right now. I checked a few months ago and they were selling them, and they've been selling them for the last like 10 years minimum. Longer than that, I believe. I think they're from like 2004, somewhere in that range, I think is when they were first introduced. And of course, you can find them on Grailed or eBay and things like, I mean, even Amazon still has them. Zappos, I think, still has these. So it's not like they're not being sold anymore. I just, for whatever reason, Clarks.com or .USA or whatever it is, doesn't seem to carry them. But if you're looking for a really basic shoe that can be dressed up or dressed down, that can take a beating, that could be easily cleaned and oiled and then still look good 10 years later, I highly recommend the Clarks Desert Shoe or the Clarks Desert London. They have seen me through the thick and thin of it. And honestly, it's probably one of the best purchases I've ever made. I mean, it's the only time I've spent $100 on shoes, and they are, they last 10 years. So if you're in the market for a pair of casual shoes, definitely consider them. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you on the next one.